I'm really excited to introduce our author here tonight, Cara Achterberg. Did I say that right? Is the author of 7 books, and she's the co-founder of Who Will Let the Dogs Out? That always makes me want to sing, right? Who let the dogs out? Come on. Who. All right, sorry. It's a national nonprofit that raises awareness and resources for shelter dogs and the people who fight for them. She lives here in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia with her husband, who's back there, 3 rescue dogs, and a rotating cast of foster dogs and cats. For more information, you can go to her website, which is Cara, C-A-R-A, Rights, as in writing, WRITES.com. So she's here tonight to talk about her latest book, which is 100 Dogs and Counting, One Woman, 10,000 Miles, and a Journey into the Heart of Shelters and Rescues. Let's give her a warm welcome. Woo! Thanks so much for being a part of this.
Thanks for having me here.
And who's the cover dog?
Oh, that is Snoopy. He was a foster dog. He was just the most beautiful dog, wasn't he? He lives in Washington, D.C. with a family of 5 children now.
That's great. I'm so glad, because I was thinking, did the publisher pick this dog, or was this one of your dogs?
No, they let me pick every time. In fact, my last book, Another Good Dog, which was about fostering, that is also a puppy that I fostered. And when I did my book tour, those dogs would come out and sign with me. Like, the adopters would bring them, and we would have an ink pad, and they would sign the books. It was so much fun. Oh, it was so much fun.
All right. And so you all need to know, we were starting this whole series in a whole different way with the dog energy, and Cara was going to be bringing puppies and foster dogs. So tell us what happened to your dogs this week.
Oh, I had puppies, I had dogs. We were so full of dogs. I don't know if you know right now, but right now is a really tough time in shelters and rescues all over this country, and adoptions are down. And so we had just had these dogs one that had been with us since April, and I had 5 puppies and 2 other dogs, and all of them got adopted last week. It was crazy. It was amazing. But I don't have a dog for you. I only have 1 dog at home right now, 1 foster dog at home right now, and she wasn't able to make this trip.
My husband is going to be really happy, because I swore I would not take home another dog. And it would have been hard to resist dog
They were
energy.
really cute.
Oh. What were their names?
Oh, they were the mother's name was Cherry, so they were all named after Cherry. Maraschino, Tart, I can't remember, Rainier. They were all named after cherries.
And it is a question, who names the dogs? Do you get to name them?
Sometimes. This time the shelter named the mama Cherry, and then we picked her up on our way back from a shelter tour, and so my photographer who was with me picked those names. So, all the puppies, different kinds of cherries. She was Googling different, one was Utah Giant, which is a cherry. I didn't know that, but he was the biggest one.
I was going to say that's a big dog, right?
Yeah.
Utah Giant. Okay, so the book starts and it's called 100 Dogs. You're way past that number. Can you tell us how many dogs you have fostered?
I don't know. It's well over 200, but I don't know. I keep thinking that one day I would sit down and go back through. I blog about every foster dog that I have on a blog called Another Good Dog. And I could go back through there and figure it out. I know it's over 200, but I'm not sure. Really not sure.
And I know the book, we have it up here behind you, Another Good Dog, really talks about the fostering process. It really goes in depth for people who are interested in fostering and goes into that. But kind of give us just a short bit of how you got into doing this and how long you've been fostering dogs.
So we've been fostering dogs since 2015. And we started because I had a dog. I was not a crazy dog person at all. I always thought I was a cat person, actually, and I also had horses, but we had a dog. We had this wonderful dog named Lucy, had her for almost 18 years, and when she passed, we decided we would get another dog. Took us a little while, but we decided to get another dog, and when we started looking, I just couldn't pick one. We would go to these shelters, and I would meet a dog and think, this is a nice dog, but 18 years with you. I don't think I can do it. And we couldn't land on one, so we decided to foster. And we were gonna pick the dog that was our dog, and then we'd be done. And then we still do it. 8 years later, 200 dogs later, we still foster because I learned what was happening and I couldn't stop.
So you're saying that there's potential for any of us who are dog lovers out here to become 200 dog fosterers.
Definitely.
Just remember
Definitely.
that. In this book, one of the, in the beginning, one of your main characters is not on the cover here, but is Gayla. And I just wanted you to tell us a little bit about what it was like to foster Gayla, why you featured Gayla in this book.
Yeah, so she was a dog. Up to that point, I'd had all these really fun experiences with my kids, and we had all these really great dogs. And we had definitely had some that were harder, for sure. But when we got Gayla, she was just really hard, a tough dog. She was an escape artist. She climbed over a kennel fence that was like 8 feet tall. I have it on video. She climbed up, she perched on the top like a bird, and then she left. And she jumped off our deck. She could open doors, windows. She escaped all the time. And she was just a really high energy dog. She was tough. She didn't get along with other dogs very well. And so we had her for a long time, for like a year. And so many things happened. Like one time she got out, got into the pasture, chased my horses. One of my horses kicked her and it broke her jaw. We had to nurse her through that whole time. Anyway, it was just this on and on. And that was the moment when I suddenly was like, I can't do this forever. I just can't. This is too hard. And so Gayla was the one who made me start to think further than the next dog I was getting off transport, to think like, where are these dogs coming from? Like, it never ends. Like, I thought, oh, we're going to foster. And we had fostered like almost 100 dogs at that point, or maybe over. And I thought we should have made a dent. And we hadn't. The list was longer, not shorter. So Gayla kind of drove me to start asking some of the harder questions that I dug into with 100 dogs. And you said Gayla got hit, by the horse. I know that my dog, bad dog Jake, he's been featured at WMRA's pet promotions. You go into it and you don't realize there's going to be a big cost. He had a hole in his heart. And we went ahead and filled that, and he's filled our hearts. But you sometimes wonder, how am I spending money to care for a stray? I think Gayla was from the South. She was from South Carolina. And one that you're fostering. I mean, why didn't you give up? Well, I didn't have to pay for much of Gayla. We did because I felt responsible for her, so we did. But other instances when things happened, the rescue definitely was behind us on all of that. But, I think that all the time, like, why do we spend so much energy and effort on someone else's dog, technically? So going to be someone else's dog. And, we put these dogs in this position. We domesticated dogs. We made them dependent on us. And then how dare we throw them away? So I feel that I can't give up on them, and I won't give up on them.
Yeah, I hear that. And you hear that in what you write, your passion and your honesty. Did Gayla teach you anything about fostering? Some hard lessons?
Oh my gosh. She taught me a lot. She taught me a lot about being smart. A lot of times it was just like, oh, it's so much fun to have this dog. And I look back on some of the things we did early on, especially, that were not probably the smartest things to be doing with a dog we don't know. We don't know its history. We don't know anything about it. And Gayla really made me start to think harder about my responsibility to this animal, to preparing it for a life with somebody else, not me. So she taught me a lot of lessons in that. And she did get adopted. She's doing really well. In fact, her adopter fosters. So that's cool.
And there is a good picture of Gayla here in the book as well. So that is fun. I kept looking as I was reading it. I would go, what dog? Let me go look at a picture of that dog. Talking about, the other part of this book, which obviously is a huge part, is looking at that larger system. Even those who rescue may not know all the different parameters of the shelters that are out there. I mean, shelters in our area, whether they're nonprofits, no kill. You hear all these things, but you don't really know. Can you talk a little bit about that journey and really the differences in the types of shelters that are out there for the animals?
Yeah, I had no idea. I really had no idea, and that's most of why I wrote this book. Was the first time I went to a shelter was in North Carolina, and I was on a book tour for Another Good Dog, and I had this crazy idea that I would fill my car with donations, and I would drive down to the shelter, and because it was the tour was going through the South, and I thought, oh, this is a perfect opportunity. I will go to these shelters and I will take donations, and it'll be so much fun. That's what I thought. And so my best friend decided to come with me. She's not a dog person at all, but she was like, oh, road trip, this will be fun. Let's do this. And then we got so many donations that I had to rent this enormous cargo van, huge cargo van. And it was loaded to the ceiling with stuff. And it was like being in a boat. The whole thing it was really kind of scary in the beginning until we started giving away stuff. But we went to a shelter in North Carolina, and we walked in, and I had to pee, and I ran for the bathroom. And I get in the bathroom, and I get in there, and there's like all these boots, and it's tiny, and it stinks, and there's a roach crawling across the floor. And I suddenly went, what the heck am I doing? Why am I here? Like, how can this is crazy that I thought I could come here and do something. And went back out to meet the people that we were with, mostly volunteers and the director. Walked through this shelter. 80% of the animals there were heartworm positive. They were mostly sheltered. Their kennels were outside. And this was a shelter on the eastern edge of North Carolina, right next to the Dismal Swamp. So if you know anything about heartworm and mosquitoes, that explains why 80% of the dogs were heartworm positive. And I talked to the director, and I said, well, how many dogs were adopted this month? And she said 3. And I said, well, how many dogs came in this month? 100. And I was stunned, and I was ashamed that I didn't know this, that I had fostered 100 dogs at that point, and I had no idea it was like this in a town where like an hour and a half away people were vacationing. Like, it just was insane to me. And it went from there, just going to other shelters and rescues. That tour was, I think, 14 different stops. It was hard, and we went to places that were euthanizing dogs. We went to places that were someone's yard, basically. We went to all these different places, and I saw all these different faces of rescue, and I was blown away. I was blown away, and all I could think was, if I don't know this is happening, and I have fostered 100 dogs, and I am writing about it, I wrote a book about it, if I don't know this is happening, nobody does, pretty much, in this country. So that's what launched our nonprofit, was that realization.
I guess, what was the worst shelter that you were in? I mean, you don't have to name the name.
Well, yeah. I'll name the name. So I've been to now almost 120 shelters in 12 different states, and it's hard to name the worst, but I've seen a lot of amazing shelters. And then they're not necessarily saving every dog, but they have people there who are working so hard. And I say it all the time, shelters are not the enemy. They are not the bad guys. The ACOs are not the bad guys. They are given an impossible task. They are given too many dogs, not enough resources, and then these crazy expectations that they're going to save every single one of these dogs, and that's impossible. And so they're made out to be the bad guys, but they are not the bad guys. So the very worst shelter, actually, I pulled the dog from, that is my dog now, and Kate's met my dog. So Miss Fanny Wiggles, formerly, came from Huntington Dog Pound in Tennessee, in Weakley County, Tennessee, and it's an awful place. It's the dog pound that you remember as a child. It's a cement bunker, and the dogs are placed in their kennel, and their fronts are chain link, but they're all rusted and broken. And the dogs are placed in the kennels. There's a whiteboard in the one storage room where there is a trash can of dog food. They write the kennel number and the date. And the dog catchers, and they are dog catchers. I actually looked it up because I didn't believe the rescue person who took me there that they really call them dog catchers. They really are dog catchers. They are paid to be dog catchers. I think they get $1,000 a month which is insane. So they put them in there, and then they come back and check the dates, and whatever dogs have been there as long as they're allowed to be there and haven't been claimed, they drive to the local vet and have them euthanized. And so Fanny came out of that shelter. I was there with a rescue person visiting, and she was just, there was something about her. She broke my heart. I didn't take her that day because I couldn't. I was going other places on this tour, but that rescue did pull her, and I went back and got her a couple months later.
And that was sort of the hopeful, as you were writing this, you would spotlight certain dogs that really kind of called out to you. Mm-hmm. What is that? I mean, do you know what that is after fostering and being drawn to certain dogs? Is it just dog magic?
I don't know. It must be dog magic. I don't know. I have no idea, because every time we do these tours, the photographer Nancy, who co-founded the rescue with me, we talk about which dogs are you bringing home with you in your heart? Obviously, we can't bring them home. And it's always interesting to me, the ones she picks and the ones I pick, but there are always dogs that for whatever reason, they just reach you somehow. It's a look in the eye. It's something. But it always, for me, it's almost always a pit bull of some sort, but because I know they have the worst chance, they're most likely not to get out.
Let's talk about pit bulls. Mm-hmm. I think that's the first time in reading this that I didn't realize it was a breed.
It's not
Do you want to talk about pit bulls a little bit?
So everybody calls them a breed, but pit bull's not a breed. It's an umbrella term for a bunch of different kinds of dogs based on appearance. Based on, they have large heads, little ears, muscular build, very short fur. They're a terrier, but they could be anything. And many times shelters will label them labs or pit bulls, and whether they choose lab or pit bull will decide their fate. But it's the same dog, and they don't have any idea because they don't read their DNA. And as I said, it's an umbrella term, so it drives me batty when people say pit bulls as if they're this evil thing, and they talk about more pit bulls bite this or blah blah blah. Well, that's so not fair. That's like saying, that's like comparing an apple to all of the fruit, because you're talking about a group of dogs that could be up to 10 different breeds that can technically be considered pit bull, compared to golden retriever. That's not a fair comparison. So making that comparison, it's not fair. They are. If you want to call them a breed, if you're going to classify them that, and a lot of people, say I love pit bulls, and I do love pit bulls, but I would say that the dogs that we call pit bulls are some of the smartest, most energetic, most intense, most loving animals you could meet, and it's just unfair that we've vilified them for a lot of reasons.
You also talked about the dogs that, and I don't know whether Fanny had an X on her, mm-hmm. But that was, to read you walking down and seeing the dogs that had an X on their chart. They were scheduled for death. Mm-hmm. How do they determine what dogs are going to, is there a standard, or was it just random?
It's it's somewhat random, but it's really up to the animal control officer usually, how they decide that. The one that I wrote about in the book is Oconee in South Carolina, and they're very transparent, and I actually have a lot of respect for that shelter because they put the X's on the cards. They take in 500 dogs a month. They cannot possibly place 500 dogs a month, so they make these incredibly hard decisions, when I was there both times, I found a puppy, a 6-month-old black puppy, both visits, which is bizarre, who had X's on their kennel card. And the X just meant that when they need another space, this is a dog that could be euthanized. And I did ask the rescue coordinator there, why? And she said, color, length of stay, breed. Those are 3 of the things. So black, pit bull, supposedly, and these puppies had been there, and they were 6 months old. And both times I was able to get a rescue to pull them. Both times those puppies went home, got adopted, got wonderful homes, got wonderful lives. They just lucked out because we walked through it that time. But it was amazing to me because the second time we were there and we saw this one, there was another dog, another puppy, looked just like it, but it had a tag that said reserved for rescue. A rescue was picking it up that following Tuesday, and But it looked so much like the puppy that we were trying to find a rescue for that night at the hotel, Nancy and I had to keep holding the pictures, looking at the pictures, and checking the color of the water bucket because they looked so alike. But the one being pulled by rescue was labeled Labrador, and the one with the X was labeled Pit Bull. So it's arbitrary. It's that animal control officer looking at that animal and saying that's a pit bull and writing it on their card. And I really wish we could get away from it. I wish we don't know their breed. I wish we could just say mixed breed because that's what it is. Mixed breed.
You had a name too.
Great American Shelter Dog is what we keep wanting to put out there. It's like, that's what we should label all of these dogs.
Great American Shelter Dog. I can just hear people saying, I brought home a Great American Shelter Dog. It could change everything.
It could.
How we market it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So in terms of your journey, you went mainly to the South. And that they were rescuing a lot of dogs out of the South and bringing them north. Is that right?
Yes.
And what is the difference between the South and the North? We're not going to talk Civil War, but what is the difference in the dog and the shelters and in why we need to rescue so many more?
Ooh, that's such a big question. Oh, but the thing is, what's amazing to me is we live on the line. I don't know about you, but I have neighbors on my street who would never bring their dog indoors. Never. Their dog lives outside all the time. And this is literally, I have wondered for the longest time. I used to live in Pennsylvania and I would travel south and then I was like, where is this line where it changes? Because in Pennsylvania, this wouldn't happen, but here this is happening. And it's literally this area. It's like this part of Virginia across. It's amazing to me. But it has a lot to do, I think, with laws, first of all, in the Northeast, in Pennsylvania where I fostered, every dog has to be licensed. And when I fostered, I had to have an inspection from the dog warden had to come to my house twice a year, a surprise inspection, to make sure that my house was safe for these animals. I had to show evidence that every dog had a rabies. I had to be able to say, I had a kennel record that had to show where the dog came from, every dog, where every dog went, any medical things that went on. They checked my fence. They made sure I had a fire extinguisher. This happened, and literally right in Pennsylvania. That would never happen. That would never happen in Virginia even, but that would never happen in Georgia or Mississippi or Louisiana. But there's stricter rules, and I think that makes it. What it does is it makes people realize these animals are valuable. They matter. We care. Everybody, it matters. You cannot let your dog just run loose. And that's not the case. In the South, a lot of places, and I had an animal control officer, actually a deputy police officer, explain to me that in the South, in that part of the South, this was rural Tennessee, it was a rural area and everyone let their dogs run loose forever. They've always let their dogs run loose and they lived on these big farms. And then all this development happened. These towns happened, these neighborhoods happened, and suddenly they're getting crowded. And suddenly it's a problem that their dog is not spayed or neutered, and their dog might fight with another dog or whatever. Now it's suddenly a problem. And so there's a little bit of a resentment, I think, there, because it's just the way it's always been. The dogs have run loose. And the other thing that's weird in the South is people have yard dogs, which I didn't know was a thing, but yard dogs are basically dogs that just hang around. We have yard guinea hens on our street that nobody knows who they belong to, and they wander up and down the street, and people feed them, and they live. But they have dogs that do that. They just exist in a neighborhood, and people throw them scraps, and they're called yard dogs. Or throwaway dogs. That's the other term I've heard, which I hate.
$2 dog. Mm-hmm. I've heard that too. Mm-hmm. Was there a difference that you found in rural settings versus urban settings as far as the quality of shelter and the quality and the culture around the animals?
It's a little bit different. In the city, it's much more of dogs on chains. We've gone out several times with organizations that try to help the people who keep their dogs on chains in their backyard. A lot more pit bulls in the city. That's just a status symbol. It's kind of morphing into bulldog. Bulldog is like the dog right now, and Cane Corso also. So there's that piece of it. And the numbers are higher. And maybe that's simply because in rural, dogs can disappear a lot easier. You don't find them as much.
Well, I wonder too, with all of the programs and the groups out there, there's the programs on television, the Best Friend Sanctuary, and why are the intake numbers higher?
Right now is a perfect storm. I keep calling it that. It's a perfect storm of all the reasons why any dog would end up in a shelter. So, gosh, the pandemic is a huge piece, and everyone's read about that and seen about how dogs are being returned in huge numbers, and they are, but that's not necessarily because people adopted them and decided they didn't want them anymore. The housing crisis is driving a big part of it. A lot of places, people who rent are being ousted because they're going to renovate, and suddenly they no longer can afford that apartment, and now they can't find an apartment where they can have this dog. And that's we hear that one a lot. People lose their housing and now they can't have their dog. Breed-specific legislation, insurance companies that won't insure you if you have a pit bull, which I'm waiting for some really big law firm to take this on, because you can't prove that, like, there's no such thing as a pit bull. And if you don't have DNA, how can you? But people lose their insurance, they lose their homes over owning a pit bull. It happens fairly often. During the pandemic, a lot of places did not spay or neuter for 6 to 12 months, and that has a huge impact on the number of dogs coming into shelters. Not just then, but like it reverberates, because once they started working again, shelters are the last people to get those appointments. Everybody else gets them first. So now dogs are getting adopted out, unspayed, unneutered, because you got to get them out. Otherwise, you have to kill them. So that was a really big piece. And then also during the pandemic, we had this massive desire for puppies. Everybody wanted a puppy. So puppy mills and backyard breeders and legit breeders ramped up production to meet that need. And that carryover is still happening. The other piece that I see is when you go to a shelter, the average age of a dog is between like a year and 2 years, like the teenage time. And so I kept saying when all these puppies were going out, this is gonna be bad, because they're coming back and we're still getting that. So that's just the time when it's harder, when they suddenly are not cute. If you didn't do your work, they may not be manageable, they're harder. And that's the age that dogs end up in the shelter. So it's like this perfect storm of everything that could cause dogs to end up in a shelter happened at once. And right now it's all over the country. It's not just the South, it's everywhere. I was reading about dogs being euthanized in New York and Pennsylvania even, and Philly, and everywhere right now. It's just a really hard time. I'm hoping it's like this lump in the snake and we just have to get through it, but I don't know. I'm hoping that's what it is.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to take it to questions, but I want to definitely get to those positive places, because we were going into those that were dark corridors, but what are the lights? But I want to look out, and if there's any questions here in our audience. What's the average length of time that you have a dog for fostering?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, totally. It just ranges. Puppies would go super fast. Smaller dogs go super fast. I rarely foster a small dog though, but it just depends on the dog, and it depends on the time of year. I've learned that like summer is a tough time, like late summer is a tough time, but right after Labor Day, they're all getting adopted. January is a good time. Dogs get adopted. Holidays sometimes are good times, like Christmas time, like right at the start of summer, there's a time. But in between that, they can be a long time. If they have any issues with other dogs, if they have an issue, Argus, the dog who I thought was going to be here with me tonight, because I've been fostering him since April, he got adopted yesterday, and they love him, and it's working out great. But he's just afraid of men. He's not going to hurt anybody, but if a man reaches for him, he's going to duck away. He's just afraid of men. That was his only real fault. He was shy, came from Mississippi. He'd been in rescue for a year, so he just hadn't been exposed to a lot. He was shy and anxious about things, but it's hard to say. They all change. Sometimes they're gone in a second. The shortest I ever had a dog was 24 hours. That was pretty fast.
How long did you have Gayla?
I had Gayla a year, and then she actually moved to another foster for about 6 weeks, I want to say, and then she got adopted.
And the question is what the average person can do to combat
breed bias, the
Right.
breed specific. Yeah, there's breed-specific legislation all over the place. Like I keep saying, I really want a big law firm to take this on. We need some really rich person to get mad that their dog can't live with them. A lot of it is just speaking up and voting with your pocketbook. And I do not represent State Farm in any way, shape, or form, but State Farm does not discriminate for breed. So if you are struggling to find insurance for your pit bull, like at your home, that's one that I know. So if you go that way, if the market drives that and doesn't put up with it, then insurance companies, I think, will get in line. It's just a matter of speaking up and arguing that and finding somebody who's a lightning rod, somebody who's in the public eye, who's willing to take it on. It's changing in different places. It's getting turned over all over the country. It's happening, that breed bias. The other thing about breed bias, though, if you go into your veterinary office, you go to a pet store, you pick up a product, every dog you see is a purebred dog. And this blows me away. Like every time I go to the vet's office and I look and there's like a heartworm poster and the flea tick people and all of these things, they're all purebred. Right now, mostly Frenchies, but purebred dogs. And that has an effect on all of us. The fact that that's what, pet food companies, they all use a purebred dog as their picture. And I think if we could have some kind of campaign to change that, it could have a really powerful effect to let people see that these dogs are just as valuable. Not that purebreds are not. I am not a person that's going to bash purebred dogs, but all dogs are valuable. Doesn't, regardless of their breed.
Lobby for only buying dog food with the Great American
the Great American Shelter Dog.
I have a picture of my dog we can put on it. Yeah, the question is about the adoption process and how people find you to adopt the dog.
Me, I'm easy. So I foster through an all-breed rescue based out of Northern Virginia, but they're all over Virginia, called Operation Pause for Homes. I also foster for the Shenandoah Humane Society. Shenandoah, I always get it wrong. Humane Society of the Shenandoah County. That's right, HSSC. Humane Society of the Shenandoah County. But you can go to any shelter, or you can just go on Pet Finder. And Pet Finder is obviously what a lot of people use to find their dogs. My issue with Pet Finder is, once again, you have to search by breed. Although they do now allow mixed breed, but I don't know anybody who goes on Pet Finder and searches for mixed breed dog. But you can search your area, and you can search, for your shelter. Like your Rockingham County shelter is an excellent shelter. And I keep hearing wonderful things about it. I have yet to have a visit there, and I was just talking with Huck, who was here. Did he vanish? Oh, he's back there. He's paying. I was just talking with him about us bringing Who Will Let the Dogs Out to Rockingham to do a feature on them, because they've really turned things around. They've shown it can be done.
So talk about that turning things around. What were the things that you saw in shelters that really were practices, policies? What works?
Oh, this is my favorite question. I've seen it. I believe that this is fixable. I mean, I can tell you these sad stories all night long, but I believe this is fixable. I know this is fixable, and it isn't even that hard. And that's what drives me to keep going to shelters and to keep writing. It's three things that I believe it takes. It takes leadership. You need a leader who is committed to saving all the dogs. Plain and simple, whether it's your director, whether it's your county executive, whoever it is that's the last where the buck stops, if they are committed to saving every savable dog, that is the most important piece. And I've seen it happen. I saw a shelter in Anderson, South Carolina. I wrote about it in the book, I'm pretty sure. Anderson County Pause, and the woman who came in and took over that shelter, it was a shelter that handled 500 dogs a month, maybe more than that. I can't remember their number. It was a really huge number. And they were euthanizing 90% of the animals. And the rescue coordinator there told me, like, it's not even a weird day for me to have to come in and euthanize 24 kittens. And she hated her job. This woman came in and in 6 months turned that shelter around. They have not, since she has been there, that was in 2018, euthanized any dog for any reason other than extreme medical or behavioral. And I asked Kim, Dr. Sanders, who runs that facility, how did you do that? And she said, we just decided to stop killing dogs. And when you take that option off the table, you find another option. And she talked about transparency, which is those X's. It's so important to be really transparent with your public and let them know what is going on so that they can help. So leadership is key, super important. The next thing is community engagement. You have to engage your community. You have to have hours when they can come to the shelter. You have to invite them to volunteer, to foster, to be a part of it, to be on an advisory board. You engage your community and they are invested in that shelter. They're going to see that shelter as a resource, a place that's there for them, to help them, not to be an eyesore or a place to dump dogs. So community engagement is the second piece. And the third one is access to affordable veterinary care. And if you have those three pieces, your shelter is going to be fine. It's going to make it. And we've watched it happen. We've been to places where they have one or two of those pieces and they're struggling. But once they have all three, they're fine. We don't worry about them anymore. We don't have to go there anymore to visit with our organization. So it's leadership, community engagement, and veterinary access. Those are the three things. If you have those three things, like I said, it's not that hard. It really isn't.
I love the story of, I think it was Cheatham. Can you share that about that trail and how to create community with the shelter?
So Cheatham was another one of those shelters was euthanizing like 90% of their dogs. They were in rural Tennessee. They're kind of like northwest of Nashville, and horrible, tough place. But they had a huge campus. They had like 78 acres, I think, and they had a new director that came in who said, we're not going to euthanize these dogs. And they had a tiny budget. So they were different than Anderson, Dr. Kim Sanders, who did that. She was a vet. They had money. It was a big place. Cheatham was small, tiny, little bitty budget. And but this woman, Kristen Reed, came in and said, we're gonna bring the community here. So they cleaned up their property, and she had her staff actually go out and cut trails on their 78 acres, which were mostly wooded. And they invited the community to come out and walk dogs on these beautiful trails. And the only thing was they had to take an adoptable dog with them for the walk on the trails. And that was one way to start getting the community to come out. She did a ton of other really smart things. She has play groups. She brought in Merck with the vaccine company to come in and do demos there and use their dogs. And they did all kinds of clever. I mean, she just reached outside the box. And then they, on those trails that they invited everyone to come out to, they put a storyboard. And we have one of those up where we are in Woodstock. I don't know if you guys have one, but on one of your trails. And they're like stories on little, like with illustrations on boards all throughout the trails. So it's like a reading lesson for kids at the same time. So they got the local high school art students and creative writing students to write a story and illustrate it, and then they put them on these boards all throughout the trails. So once again, community engagement. They got the school involved, they got the students involved, they got the families to come out, and that shelter has done so well, still to this day, saving every dog that comes through their door.
So it's not all about the money. There are some free ways to change that experience. Talk a little bit about managed intake versus open intake. I think that was an interesting approach, and I think that was at pause.
Yeah. So open intake is what all shelters used to be. It just means that the shelter will take any dog from any person at any time for any reason. So like if you don't want your dog anymore, you just take it to the shelter. That has been changing. Dr. Sanders definitely did that at Anderson. She started managed intake, which means you can come to surrender your dog, but you need to make an appointment, which I love. So it's a little cooling off period, because sometimes in the heat of the moment, you're like, I can't take another minute with this dog. But I
have a dog like that.
Yeah. So a little cooling off period, you have to wait for your appointment. Then when you come in for your appointment, they counsel them. They talk to them about like, why? Do you need food? Can you not afford veterinary care that needs to happen? Do you need help with training? Like, what do you need? And they work with people to keep them in their homes. And she does so many things. They even like will foster dogs for people who are like in between houses or even imprisoned. They will foster their dog at the shelter and then return it to them, because she knows that makes more sense than them taking another dog into the system that they now have to find a home for. Giving out heartworm preventatives. They do so much like that to keep the dog. So that's what managed intake should be if it's done correctly. But some places, managed intake means or limited intake means that they won't take a dog if they don't think they can get it adopted. So they won't take your pit bull. They won't take your old elderly dog that has issues. They just won't because they don't think they can get it adopted. And that's another form, and it's a big topic of discussion in the shelter world: managed intake, open intake, limited intake. Because it's very easy to be a no-kill shelter if you don't take in any dogs, especially dogs that are that you don't deem adoptable. So it's a tricky thing, but we need to find a common ground.
And not use those words to just cause division. Yeah. Talk about the idea of tiny shelter.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yes, Kate knows this. I just wrote about this recently. This is a brilliant brainstorm of a shelter director in Mississippi and I came up with, because right now everybody's overflowing. The problem is that if you Google the words euthanize for space, you'll get a lot of hits because a lot of places are euthanizing dogs for space, which simply means they ran out of room and they euthanized. And so we came up with this idea to build tiny shelters, meaning, and we did this as part of the organization Who Will Let the Dogs Out that I co-founded. We bought a tiny shelter for this shelter in Mississippi that was overwhelmed. And it's just a portable building. It was a 12 by 24 building that they converted into a tiny shelter. So they put in a floor and insulation, air conditioning. They fenced around it. So they have like a little yard and they have doors to go in and out, and the dogs have their own crates inside. And so they can have anywhere from 6 to 12 dogs, and they live there communally, like dogs like to live as a little pack. And they can go in and out during the day. They are crated at night. And it's an idea that we kind of put out there as, here's a way to get us through this lump in the snake. Like, you need more shelter. Well, here, put this building up. And we did it for less than $10,000. Put this building up and get through this time, and then you can sell the building. If you don't need the building anymore. And we have since then been really trying to push it on a couple places that are trying to build shelters, because I don't believe we should be building $1 million shelters. We shouldn't. We should be fixing the problem so we don't need $1 million shelters. So we've been pushing tiny shelters. It's just another solution.
It sounds like a great reality TV show, tiny dog shelters, right? Great question. How much that cost for the tiny shelter?
It really depends. In Mississippi, it was very cheap, but they got a lot of things donated. They got air conditioners donated. Someone ran the electric line for them. It was free. We budgeted about $10,000. The building itself, with a nice deal from a local, shed manufacturer, was $6,500. So that helped too. It would vary depending on where you are.
So what can we do? Giving you that other question that I think, what I love about your book too, if you didn't catch it in reading all the details and the things that you travel through, you can skip to the back and just get this shortcut of what is it we can do, each of us, even if we don't have dogs or can't keep dogs, what can we do to change this or to help this hump in the snake?
So at the very base of all of this, it's a marketing problem. There are too many dogs in certain places and not enough dogs in other places. At any given moment in time in the U.S., there are more people looking for a dog than there are dogs in the shelters. So, and Kim Caven, who wrote The Dog Merchants, says it really well in her book, if half of those people were to, instead of buying a dog, go to a shelter and adopt a dog, we would empty our shelters in a day. And when you look at it like that, that's so easy, right? It's a marketing problem. So all of us, just by encouraging other people to adopt, to go to a rescue, to go to your shelter, to try to destigmatize the idea that there's something wrong with a shelter dog. The more we can do that, so that means if you have a shelter dog, I always tell people, brag about it. When you go to the dog park, if somebody says, what breed is this? Don't guess. Don't tell them the DNA analysis that you had done through Wisdom Panel or whatever. Say, I have a shelter dog, I have a rescue dog or a Great American Shelter dog, right? Tell them that, brag on your dog. So Kate sitting over there, she and I both have rescue dogs, and we go to agility class, and we have the only non-purebred dogs in our classes. But I think we are wonderful ambassadors to, the other dogs are beautiful. I have nothing against any of the dogs in our classes. They are beautiful. But our dogs do just fine. They do really well. And so I feel like we're being ambassadors, showing that you can do agility or flyball, or my little pit bull that came out of that pound in Tennessee where she should have died. She can catch any Frisbee you throw anywhere. She will jump in a pool. She's a rocket on the agility course. You can find these dogs. And so doing more to promote that, to, if you have one, brag about it, tell people about it, is really helpful. If you have time, volunteer at your shelter. Rockingham's got a great shelter. There's other shelters in this area and rescues in this area. Volunteer a little bit of time. Even if you can't foster, even if you can't maybe go to the shelter and walk a dog, there's tons to be done. Our organization has volunteers all over the country. We have what we call virtual volunteers that we loan out to shelters for projects like social media projects or whatever, database or whatever they need. So there are ways that you can volunteer even from home, from your computer. So there's ways to get involved. It's going to take everybody, but it's not a hard problem. It really isn't. And I try to be very upbeat about it because, as I say, I believe the problem is not that people don't care. It's that people don't know. I didn't know, and most people don't know. And I think we're a dog-loving country, and we could fix this if we knew what the problem was and what we could do about it. So there's tons you can do on your own, just advocating that way. And of course, you can always donate to your shelter, donate to a rescue that you know. I would not encourage you to donate. I shouldn't say this on. Would not encourage you to donate to the big national organizations because at this point, I'm very frustrated that we need to get in these shelters and help. We need to go there and be a part of it. And I get frustrated with some of the big organizations because they give a lot of money to the big places, the big shelters that are doing just fine, and not to these little struggling animal control facilities that can't afford to spay and neuter their pets.
The question is, what about pet stores and that industry? Are they allies or are they adversaries?
I think that varies pet store by pet store. Really does. The owner, because there's a pet store in Northern Virginia that every time we leave for a shelter tour will call me and say, come and load our truck with dog food and high-end stuff, and because she wants to support that. I really don't believe we should be selling puppies in pet stores. I just took in from a puppy that was purchased in Harrisonburg, and I won't say what store. It was a Catahoula, purebred Catahoula. It was these people who were elderly, well, not elderly. I shouldn't say that because otherwise I'm getting close to elderly. But they were 70, and, in their 70s.
That's young.
Yes,
Great American
I know.
age.
So they were in their 70s, and they purchased a Catahoula leopard dog puppy. Does anybody know what a Catahoula leopard dog is?
No.
Oh my gosh. Another foster that with me, when I told her I was taking in a Catahoula, she goes, those are the devil dogs. That's what she said. But they're not. They're wonderful dogs, but they have so much energy. They are from Louisiana. They are trained and built and bred to track for days. They never stop. They never stop going. They have endless energy. So these people, these young people in their 70s bought this puppy. And the puppy when the puppy was adorable, beautiful puppy with blue eye. When it was 6 months old, it was so strong and so energetic that it pulled the woman over and she broke her hip. And so they realized they couldn't handle this puppy. And meanwhile, this puppy hasn't gotten any manners. And so while she was recuperating, the puppy was sitting in a basement for a month. So the puppy finally got surrendered to our Humane Society in Shenandoah County, and I fostered this puppy that was bonkers and off the charts. But she with a little bit of management, she came around and she did wonderful. But that pet store should never have allowed those people to adopt that puppy. So I have a real issue with pet stores. I don't think they do their due diligence, and I don't think it's a safe place for a puppy, ever. But that's my only thing with pet stores, puppies. The rest of it, they're fine. They're wonderful.
Sounds like you have a little bit of the dog whisperer in you. Able to handle that dog and change it in a short amount of time.
I only had her for about 5 weeks, and I did the very little bit I could. I'm definitely not a dog whisperer. That's why I foster. It's wonderful when you foster, they're leaving. Whenever they come, no matter whether you love them or if they're driving you bonkers, they're not staying, and that makes it much easier to deal with. It's like grandparents. I've only had this one for a little while, and then it's leaving. So you can do anything for a little while.
The honesty, like I said, you write exactly the same way. What is next for you? And tell us maybe a little bit about the nonprofit that you started, Who Will Let the Dogs Out.
Yeah, it's Who Will Let the Dogs Out. If you search for us as Who Will Let the Dogs Out, you just get rap videos, but it's Who Will Let the Dogs Out. I don't know where we came up with that name. That was Nancy and I in Alabama having a beer after a really long day. That's how we came up with that name. So Who Will Let the Dogs Out, as I said, is our mission is to raise awareness and resources for shelter dogs. So we travel there and then we follow up and we bring donations, we bring ideas. We have a website. If you go to our website, there's a resource guide on that website, and every idea that we've seen for fundraising, for grants, for resources, for volunteers, for sheltering, for whatever, they're all in that resource guide, and it's free. Anyone can see it, so we point shelters to it. We also have a volunteer who is a grants advisor who works one-on-one with these shelters and rescues to help them to be able to apply for grants. We do all kinds of, we did a documentary during the pandemic when we couldn't travel, and it did really well. I'm very proud of it. It's called Amber's Halfway Home. It was nominated for a regional Emmy, and it won I don't know how many awards at festivals. Yeah, so we're super excited, and actually it's gonna be in the Dog Film Festival, which travels the country. So it'll come to smaller art theaters all around the country. I hope it's going to come this direction. I don't know. That's what we do. And for me, next is I'm writing a book called Who Will Let the Dogs Out, which I'm hoping will be more of a nonfiction book, a little bit of memoir, but more of a nonfiction book, just the nuts and bolts, some of what I told you tonight, like definitions for all these terms and trying to lay it out, like, here's how we fix this. Let's fix this. I'm tired of fostering. Let's fix it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for what you've done. I was a little worried you were going to say it's going to be 500 dogs and counting will be the next jump up there. I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. Books are over here from Stone Soup, both Another Good Dog and 100 Dogs and Counting. She'll be up here to sign books for folks. No dog prints tonight. Too bad. Thank you again to Gaines Group and WMRA. Let's give her a round.